a little bit about process. We have a full board meeting tomorrow, and I know, as usual, subcommittees will be reporting out, and I know that the next item on the agenda is discussion of the consolidated recommendations, i.e. all the recommendations that the different subcommittees have made. So in terms of thinking about these three items on agenda item 3 for cultivation into, bona fide recommendations that we might consider, what's our timeline look like for that? Is December kind of the end of the subcommittee recommendation production process for year 1, or might there, if we do decide to pursue some of these other ideas in the first batch, will there be time in January to follow up on that? Lori?
Yeah, so there'll be time. This is the first round of recommendations, but there's the subcommittees will continue to meet, continue to discuss for those items that are necessary, that need discussion, and that will be worked on throughout the year. So it doesn't mean that something's necessarily pushed to 2025. It can be just addressed later. We will just prioritize what needs to be taken care of right away based on mandates and timelines, and then move to the other items following that.
So let me kind of clarify. So what I'm asking is for inclusion in the first round of recommendations that are going to be converted into proposed regulations this spring. Mm-hmm. What is our deadline for producing those?
Well, we're really finalizing them, looking them over in January. So, okay. And then we will present a document at that point, the end of January. So if you have more discussion, there's more work to be done in the next few weeks regarding these, there's time for that.
Okay. All right. So these 3 items are very brief translations of some items that are in the broader chart that Lundy has been working on and updating and populating with additional information. And so I wanted to pose to you, Lundy, and the other members of the subcommittee, if we want to take up any or all of these 3 to build out further what they would look like in terms of formal recommendations that the subcommittee might make to the state. Is there any discussion or comment about that? Yes, Lundy.
Yeah, I guess my question is, my document actually has, I think, upwards of 37, 39 recommendations. And so I'm just aware that in the rulemaking process, what's included in that is all state agencies will then review our recommendations and then distill what is feasible, what it can look like, how it can work. And so part of me is wondering why aren't we just submitting all our recommendations and then allowing that process to work itself out rather than hyper focusing on a couple?
Well, I appreciate that. I guess I'm sorry that there's been some misunderstanding and miscommunication. My understanding of what's been happening over the last number of months is that you and I and other subcommittee members have had the opportunity, and some have submitted ideas for recommendations that this subcommittee might make. And we have, I have proposed, and always with the solicitation of ideas from everyone on the subcommittee, what recommendations we will consider, at the upcoming subcommittee meeting, including, for example, today. And those recommendations have included ideas, that you have generated and that I have generated. So we have read through, documents that I've produced. We've read through documents that you've produced. It's not my impression that the subcommittee has endorsed every idea or recommendation that you or I have put forward. So it's been my intention to set aside time at each subcommittee meeting to, do what we just did with the 2 prior recommendations, which is give them a pretty thorough discussion and have a vote on whether or not there's consensus at the subcommittee level to transmit those to the state.
Okay. And I think I would love maybe guidance from Sam or Lori just on what's the best way to approach this, recognizing our timeline and recognizing Billy's intent, but also how do we make the most of our rulemaking process?
Please go ahead, Sam. Thank you.
Just, and I think when we submit recommendations, right, they're submitted to DORA and DOR. I don't think that for the rulemaking process, those are the authorities, right? And then CDPHA has a role with DOR and testing specifically. But I don't think anything would prevent us from also offering, right, like presenting this document, the report from the subcommittees and the recommendations from the board and this subcommittee to other agencies and getting the feedback on how to implement this, right? If it's feasible, like what is feasible? Ian?
Thanks, Sam. I think that while yes, it would be desirable to have every agency and every state official that we could review these, I think that reasonably speaking, it is probably not feasible that every agency would take an in-depth look at these proactively. What I think is more likely and probably more efficient and likely more effective as well is that these recommendations will go to who they're statutorily required to go to. The DOR and DORA will review them. One of the things that we are engaged in on the government side is we're having regular check-in meetings, cross-agency meetings. And so Sam participates in these, Lori participates in them. I apologize for the background noise. There are we have been in constant contact with other agencies that have relevant oversight or need to be informed throughout the entire process. And I think if there are specific call-outs or areas that are based on recommendations where there is a clear tie-in to another agency, we would then proactively reach out to them to say, hey, we think these recommendations affect you in this way, or we think these recommendations affect you and we're looking to understand from you how you think they may affect you. And we want you to take a look at these specific recommendations because X, Y, or Z may affect your agency. But I think that as a rule, it is unlikely that every agency will review the entire recommendations to see how or if it affects them. Recognizing that in some cases there is no direct tie-in to other agencies associated with anything that we are doing. Thank you.
Can I comment on that really quickly, Chair?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so, and thank you, Ian. I think, of course, there's a challenge, right, with this. When we would ideally like for comment and analysis from agencies that are not required to do so, that may be impacted by these things. But that's essentially why Ian and I and Lori and folks from DOR meet with our colleagues from other agencies to give them updates from board, right? Like a health equity assessment, right? Like when we're looking at 1A. I think it makes sense for us to, when we meet with CDPHA and their division directors and their agency leads, bring up that the board is recommending a health equity assessment, which is, they have the health equity, the rural health equity, I think it's board, right, that does that report. It was like one of the early things that we look at, right? And with some of the agencies that are more engaged, like CDPHE, I think this is something that we can talk to them about and see if they could include in their process and work on, right? And similarly, right, with Cannabis Business Office's involvement here, with Tristan as a non-voting participant and providing some great feedback on some of the ideas that we've been developing in the subcommittee over the past 8 months. CBO is at OEDIT and is not specifically is not outlined in statute to receive the report and implement anything, but it's something that they're aware of, and there's interest in being involved with and seeing if there's pathways and to implement some of these things. But it really just takes time and making sure that we can get the right people involved and see what is feasible to do. So when we're making recommendations that come out of this, not everything from all the subcommittees is going to be accepted by the two agencies, and it's our intention to have a reply to the recommendations that will not be implemented through the rulemaking process, and what the reason is, right? And so that's why I say tailoring recommendations or making the recommendations is totally fine, but also positioning us to be able to continue to work on them and engage with the other agencies, as well as seeing what we can implement and what avenues there might be. But I think I rambled a lot. Sorry, I took that.
All right, Ian, your hand is still up. Is that just a legacy from before? Yeah. Okay. Commissioner, please go ahead.
I just have, although I totally respect everybody that has worked on these different things and their recommendations, as a subcommittee board member, I have a problem with basically just submitting everything without the board actually taking a stance on them. So just to bypass us and throw everything in, why are we meeting if we are just going to have a few put in their recommendations and just bypass it? That's mine. Although you guys have done an amazing job, and I really think that a lot of these are great ideas. I just wanted to put that out there. That's why not everything gets passed by, and that's just my experience on other boards. Thanks.
Thank you. Lundy.
Commissioner, I actually totally agree with you. I think my concern is I'm hearing us talk about 3 to 5 recommendations when there's been over 40 recommendations for equity put on our table. And also my concern that most of the recommendations that we have discussed, we're pushing out in some way. So my concern is now we're in December and we need to submit our recommendations by January, and we've covered a couple from a long list. So how can we as a subcommittee discern how to move this forward to make an impact the first year and then also following years in a collective way that we stand behind together? So totally agree with your comments, and I think I'm looking for us to make that impact as a subcommittee, and my concern is that where we currently are, that we won't actually have an impact for equity.
Very good one.
This committee doesn't stop in January. We keep working, correct?
That's correct.
All of them do.
Let's keep working on those recommendations, Lundy. I think that we can get them through and talked out by then.
Very good. Let's get his hand up. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so when you're talking about impact, there's 2 ways to do that. One, we generate our own recommendation and it drops on a piece of paperwork this way. The other way is we start putting our point of view on some of the recommendations that are coming out of other subcommittees. And this is in line with kind of what my suggestion was, right? In the beginning, when this board was set up, the idea of doing facilitation in residence was a real thing, right? There was an idea that you would be able to do it in your basement or go to someone else's house. But I've noticed recently that, we just sat in the emergency response subcommittee yesterday, that it looks like the tide is turning on that. And as this thing launches, what people are talking about is you're going to have to go through a healing center, or they may do an exemption for like hospice, someone who's ambulatory who can't physically get there, or some end of life care, but that's still on the fence. And so right now, as it looks, you're going to have to go to a healing center if you want to access this medication. And back to Lindy's point earlier, you're talking about huge overhead. So if you're saying, hey, you want to be a facilitator in the, psilocybin space, you need a healing center. And if you're going to start it yourself, that means you need a brick and mortar spot. Okay. And so that in itself, to me, is the greatest, harm to health equity that we are facing right now as a board. If we do that, not only are you going to have someone who is liquidly capable of maintaining a commercial space that's not making profit right away, but right now we don't know that they could even get general liability insurance, that you would need to have a commercial space, or that you would be able to access banking required to hold a commercial space. And even if all that did take place, again, how many people have enough money to own that, a healing center so that a facilitator could rent it? Okay, and so I bring all that up to say that maybe this committee, in terms of impact on day one, is better focused on steering some of these policies that are being built right now back towards the middle a little bit, and we can help impact that way. And it may not be as direct as I wrote this line that ended up in the policy, but it could be that like I prevented this from ever occurring so that people couldn't get into the market in the first place. And so I just think that maybe we should spend some time there as opposed to just generating these things from scratch that maybe won't be viable for a few years. Thanks.
Thank you. Brian.
Yeah, just to kind of talk about the procedure a little bit, I think it makes total sense, like multiple members have brought up, for you to vote on the individual items or the items that you want to present to the larger panel as a recommendation, because ultimately it is a subcommittee recommendation. Just Lundy has a lot of great ideas, but not everyone is necessarily going to agree with every single thing in that document. Likewise for Dr. Gonzalez's submission, so that makes sense. I think as far as what you think should go into the report, I think it's important. I caution against tabling things that you think are important, but they're currently not feasible. And rather than doing something like that, where you're trying to debate whether or not this is going to be feasible in year 1, year 2, year 3, if it's important, consider just including it in your recommendations so that the regulators can kind of chew on it. And like Sam said, that way they can reply to what they think is feasible, what's not feasible. So maybe don't censor the committee and say something's not feasible already when you don't really necessarily know what is or isn't feasible until the regulators can weigh in. But yeah, I think ultimately it does make a lot of sense to have, going through the tons of recommendations everyone's already worked through and take a vote as to whether or not you think it's worth having it sent forward to the committee or to the board at large. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. So where are we? So I would say that we have some items on the agenda for today to take a deeper look at if we'd like. We have lots of other items that have been on the table, as Lindy noted, for some time. I want to note that it has been difficult that we cannot communicate with each other directly in between board meetings. So even though, during these discussions over the last several months, there's been invitations to submit prioritized recommendations for us to vote on, to discuss and vote on, and that the items that were prioritized for the forthcoming meeting were on the agenda, which is subject to, modification by board members before the meeting happens. It's still just been kind of, has not been fluid or really that practical to collaborate and decide how we want to prioritize recommendations and how we want to address them. So I regret that. And it sounds like there's been some mismatched expectations and understanding of the process going on. And I think that's regrettable. And we want to try as best we can to remedy that going forward. So I think that, in my mind at least, the choice before us is, A, do we want to consider any additional specific recommendations in the manner that we have so far, which is to identify them and have an in-depth discussion about them and vote on them before, basically with some remaining time today and then again in January, in hopes that we can produce some additional ideas for inclusion in the initial year report? Or do we want to isolate out the ideas that have been on the table that we have not yet given that process to and figure out some kind of en banc, perhaps an appendix, but some way to formally communicate them to the state in this first round, noting they haven't each of them gotten the thorough committee, under subcommittee review, and noting that, as has been discussed and as has been the case for prior recommendations, not every subcommittee member probably agrees with every idea that is in the longer list. So we would want to make sure that that's clear in whatever way we communicate them formally to the state if we decide to do that. So I guess that's just my statement of the question that's before us. And I would like to see if there's any additional subcommittee member or non-voting participant, opinions or input on that question. Dr. Goodwin.
I like the idea of taking everything that we have so far. Like Lundy said, she got 39. You've got so many. I don't know how many they were. Just put them in the same format as A and B were today, and let's just burn through the list of what we've got. Yep, we want it. No, we don't. Or let's kick it and work on it later. And then so we at least have a, this is what we've gotten so far. Because I know what Lundy's saying too. Like, hey, put in all this work. Like, why is it in the ether? Let's just get out and at least get it down and start molding it into a straw person. And so, and I think we could do that pretty efficiently if someone could put that document together and we just start going through it. And I'd be down for that.
Thank you. And reminder to all subcommittee members and participants to use the preferred pronouns of the committee members and others. Thank you. Lundy.
Thanks, Chair, on both comments. And thank you, Dr. Goodwin. I actually agree with you. I'm also a little bit confused because I recall back in August or September, I was actually tasked with consolidating others' recommendations so that we could have one document, which is what my document is. It's a consolidation of all the recommendations from subcommittee members that were put up to the subcommittee up to that point. So my document isn't exclusive to me, actually. And also, I agree with you that I think if we could have it before us and talk through them as robustly as possible, then we can make a lot more progress. And so I do know that since at least the last update to my document, we've gotten a lot more information over the last couple of months. So I would like some time to be able to update it and even articulate maybe recommendations that we're thinking about for first year compared to following years, since that's a point of priority that has seemed to come up in this meeting in particular. But the model you're recommending is what I hoped for my document originally, and I would love for us to return to so that we could all collectively dig in to the full picture and make progress together.
Thank you. Lori.
Yeah, I just want to point out that the consolidated recommendation document contains like everything that had been worked on. It contains the list that Lundy is talking about, the questions and the items on the agenda today. There has been a ton of work, discussion that has gone into this subcommittee meeting and into the combined document. And I think that it's worth looking at as a whole, everyone reviewing that document to see where some of the recommendations that might not have been put on the agenda in the upper section can apply maybe or have already applied in other subcommittees. I know a lot of you sit on multiple committees, so things are discussed across the board and when you're in a different meeting, and a lot of that has been incorporated. I want for sure for you to applaud you all in completing this volume of work. There is a lot of information here, and we can move it forward and have answers to from the agencies on a response for each item. That is perfectly acceptable, and we will be doing that in the coming months. So I just wanted to make note of that there's really a lot of work here, and it's all combined in this document, which is the next item on the agenda.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Jeff.
That's an excellent reminder that the chart is, in fact, in the broader document that is the working document, as far as I understand it, for what the board as a whole will be transmitting to the state. Am I saying that accurately, Lori?
Yes.
Give or take. So, in that sense, unless we decide to change, or, to recommend to change this document, the point's a little bit moot. But I also want to go back to Lundy's point that, let's in January, let's line up as many of these, in a row, and just, try to be concise, and just for the ones that we haven't addressed yet, at least, and that we think are, should be prioritized for the initial round. Let's just do it. Let's go through it. Lundy, is there something that you wanted to say?
Well, I was also just going to say, I think even in this subcommittee meeting, I'm seeing like people have really diverse, important perspectives. And if people could really look ahead of time so that they can come with their synthesized thoughts so that we actually can plow through them, I would love that, because I think, even today I'm going to apply some of what I heard for how we could make it more equitable. And that is equity, right? Is diversity of wisdom and perspective to make it accessible to all of us. I just also want to say that for those subcommittee members who maybe didn't submit documentation, maybe consider submitting something that could help add to the conversation.
Thank you. Agreed. Okay, so I think that what I'm hearing, and we'll hang on for any additional comments on agenda item 3 before we move forward, is that it doesn't make sense to isolate out these 3 items that are on the agenda today, that we should instead take the time to kind of enumerate and restate the wider array of recommendations that are still on the table, and make as much progress through them in our January meeting as we can, and that to be as successful at that as possible, board members should, or at least I request that subcommittee members take some extra time between now and the next meeting to study this chart and the array, of in-depth information that is provided there, and keep an eye out for that next draft agenda and packet when it comes, with some of the kind of restatement and reprioritization of these, so that, as Lundy said, we can be as efficient and productive as possible at the next meeting, and get as much, do as much as we can for the sake of equity in our first round of recommendations. Yes, Rochelle.
Can you tell me where this document lives that we're referencing right now?
Yes. Well, I could try. I know it's confusing.
So for board members, sorry, Chair.
That's right. Go ahead.
So it's in a folder for board members to be able to access their documents for meetings.
So the subcommittee, non-voting subcommittee participants do not have access to that folder, Sam? Is that right?
To your folders, no.
Okay, but they do get the agendas and packets in advance of the meeting, like?
Typically, but I don't know if I had time to send it out, so I will send out the materials from this meeting, so you should have that.
Okay. And we'll just want to make sure that, you're welcome, that the charter, that kind of the next iteration, that the information the charter is going to take for the January meeting, that's in the packet itself so that the non-voting participants can also take a look at that and give us their input. At least that's my request. Okay. Any objection to moving forward on that basis before we move to agenda item number 4? Okay. Thanks everybody for that discussion. All right. So agenda item 4 is to look at the consolidated recommendations. And as Lori said, that is the recommendations of all subcommittees as they stand today, and that they continue to, I believe, evolve and be edited and added and subtracted. And so we're not going to go through each one, seriatim, but we're going to open it up for subcommittee members and non-voting participants to comment on these recommendations that other subcommittees have generated. If you have any such comments, Dr. Goodwin, please go ahead.
I do not like that you have to have the healing center. And I really do think that this is going to be, the biggest challenge to health equity. I really do. And just from the overhead perspective and the amount of liquid cash you would need from this thing, and I know that the idea, as I'm hearing it, is that just as a phased approach, and that it is a new industry and people are still a little shaky about it. Let's keep it conservative in the beginning. Let's keep it, to these healing centers, maybe the home visits, and then maybe the residential thing down the road. But I really just think it is going to stop all progress from the beginning. And I also think it's going to create kind of a stovepipe to care, meaning that if let's say there are only 2 or 3 healing centers in Colorado, because there's only 2 or 3 investors who can afford it, and all these facilitators have to rent that space, then there's only so many rooms and so many places available. And so again, the same problem exists. And so I just think that this whole thing is going to be a problem. And I really think we need pushback on it. I can't say it enough, and I'm going to say it in every meeting because I am hardcore against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Goodwin. Lundy.
Dr. Goodwin, I think something I've appreciated about being on the subcommittee with you is you and I tend to come at things from different angles, but I could not be in more agreement with you here from the get-go of how against this I am, because we are inherently guaranteeing that we're encouraging a monopolizing of the industry. We are inherently guaranteeing that facilitators do not have autonomy. And we are ignoring the fact that, even to points that were made earlier, most practitioners are in private practice of some kind. And so we are eradicating the realities of how people are approaching what practice could look like and putting it in the hands of the people who have the most money to be able to do healing centers. So, I'm with you on that point.
Thank you, and I'll hand it to Dr. Jones in just a second. I just want to note that, and I think we know this, but for the sake of everyone watching, that this subcommittee has formally adopted the recommendation that that the link between facilitators and healing centers be, or the mandatory link be broken, and there's some ambiguity, I think, in the law about whether or not that link is actually there, but we do want to, we have discussed and agreed to recommend that facilitators not be required to partner with or work for or own or what have you healing centers, and that therefore they should be able to acquire and transfer natural medicine product independently of healing centers. Dr. Jones.
I don't need to reiterate because Dr. Goodwin and Lundy already just said it, but as a non-voting member and a physician, I think that it is just a huge turnoff and is going to just, it'll create a monopoly. Only the people with money and power are going to own and control these healing centers, and it's going to really turn off, like the indigenous communities and people with religious ceremony. I just think it's a terrible thing, and I just wanted to reiterate that I can't agree more.
Thank you. Brian.
So just to put some policy recommendations to that I think the general will concern about having to go to a healing center. So I think the part where this is where the rub is here is that I think in the natural medicine code, so DOR's regulations, the statutes rather, that defines the different license types. There are, there's the cultivator license, the manufacturer license, the healing center license. The language in those actual license, it doesn't foreclose it, but it doesn't necessarily contemplate the transfer of natural medicines directly from a cultivator to a facilitator. And I know this has come up in products before. I just don't remember if we've talked about it in this subcommittee. So as far as like a recommendation of like how you create an action item out of the recommendation that they should be independent, one easy action item to put into the report is you should change the definition of those license types so that it specifically contemplates transfer of natural medicines directly to a facilitator from a cultivator or a producer.
Thank you, Brian. And I don't know why this is my shtick, but that's what. So the recommendation number 4 that's in front of us on the screen is a legislative recommendation to do essentially that, and we can reword it to be clearer. But I think this is the exact issue and statutory text that this recommendation is pointing at. Yes, Lundy.
Yeah, I was actually just going to say I was the one who actually found this gap and made this recommendation here first, and then it's rippled into the other subcommittees. So I guess my question maybe is to you, Dr. Goodwin, of where did it shift?
Is it okay if I talk, Chair? Sorry.
Please, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, yesterday, I didn't know that we were kind of so far down the road on this, but yesterday during the the emergency response subcommittee, we had a group come in who were building kind of a screening tool. And then as the discussion unfolded, they were just kind of saying, nah, the residence thing isn't going to happen. And then, the lawyers were kind of in there. And then it was like, nope, it's going to be healing centers. And then maybe this, the end of life care or someone who's in hospice or something. But that there was people from other subcommittees too, they're all kind of chiming in, and it just looked like the tide was going to, those are going to be your two options. It's going to be a healing center or maybe an exemption. Yeah, I was like, what? So, yeah.
Thank you. Wendy.
Can I defer to Sam before I provide my closing thought?
Sure. Sam.
Yeah, I think a recommendation to the agency to revise that in statute is completely fine. I think it makes complete sense to do it regardless of like what the restrictions are right now. But I'm not an attorney. But I think having this subcommittee say that and state that, and having it documented that you are saying that from the subcommittee and maybe the full board, is probably the route we want to go on this, because we don't know what's going to happen in future years or whatever, or like this year or next year, depending on what happens in rulemaking. I think most folks agree that this is something that is common in this, or should be a pathway, and consolidating it to one location, one license type, to essentially be moving the product or whatever, and the associated fees with that, potentially that could come up, that it could charge. Goes back to us like not pigeonholing ourselves, and if it's something that we could do. I saw Brian's hand to go up, so I'll stop talking, but I'll let Brian comment if it's on that. I think regardless of where emergency response safety and ethics lands on their recommendations on that, I think it makes sense to include it.
Lundy, you want to go ahead, or you want to defer to Brian? It's up to you.
I'll defer to Brian.
Okay. Thank you all. So I think Sam brings up a good point that, like, I mean, the emergency response is a different subcommittee and they're thinking of different issues. And if they want to make that recommendation, they can. There's nothing that stops this committee from making a totally opposite recommendation. It's probably really helpful for the regulators to hear two viewpoints, because maybe there's a way to get to the middle where, you know, you can solve the problems that the emergency response subcommittee is worried about without actually requiring facilitators to go to the healing center. But the specific reason why I raised my hand was just to propose, like, adding a bullet point number 5 or something to get at the natural medicine code, because the way that I read this right now, it's targeted at the Natural Medicine Health Act, but the actual definitions that I think are concerning are in the Natural Medicine Code. So I would recommend adding something to this that says something to the effect of the legislature should revise the natural medicine license types codified at 4450, 401 to 404 to clarify that a facilitator can purchase natural medicine or natural medicine product directly from cultivators or product manufacturers. And I can shoot that to the staff on the back end just so that you have the language.
Go ahead and send that over real quick. I'm going to go ahead and make a comment, and then we can add it if you guys are good with that.
Okay. So I think what I'm hearing from Brian is that we should, what I would propose is that we just replace the language that's there at number 4 right now with the language that Brian just said, because it's clearer and more specific. I think it's intended to accomplish the same thing. And I thought that the name of the piece of the Colorado Code that relates to this program is called the Natural Medicine Health Act, and that's why it says that. But giving the specific statutory citation, I think, is more precise. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, so there's two. So there's the Act, which is like DORA, DOR, it sets up the whole program, and then you got to look at the Natural Medicine Code, which is 4450, and that's going to have all of your information about DOR specifics. So that's why I think it's super helpful to talk. There might be some modifications to the Natural Medicine Health Act, so I think maybe don't replace it entirely, and that way it's just it's a flag like, hey, look at both spots to make sure the statutes are consistent. But I just want to make sure that the code gets called out, because I think that's where the rub's going to be, because that's where the definitions of the licenses are.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Lundy.
I agree with Brian, and I like that adjustment. My only addition is I think facilitator autonomy is essential to the industry. I think it's essential to equity for access. And so I think, our conversation has gone from both facilitator autonomy from healing centers as well as facilitator autonomy to purchase directly from cultivators. So I just want to acknowledge that I think that point of facilitator autonomy is something that we need to, as a subcommittee, advocate for.
I agree. Dr. Goodwin.
Yeah, as Brian was talking, I think I remember too, a lot of this is being driven from DOR's perspective, right? DOR, they didn't want residences at all. And so, but I think they were open to the conversation. And so I think, Sam's suggestion of, hey, let's put that in there, and exactly what Lundy just said, I think we should put all that in there too. Someone mentioned yesterday the idea of a mobile license, right? And so maybe it is a separate type of license that allows you to go into residence. Maybe it requires a little bit more training, safety or first aid or whatever that's going to be. And it might be a little bit more on the front end in terms of licensure, because you do have that extra ability to kind of go out to the residences, but it would save you on kind of the overhead costs of the brick and mortar. I would be down for something like that too, if we wanted to suggest like a specific mobile license that someone could get that would allow them to do that, because some of the arguments are safety, right? Like going to someone's house, having them come to yours. It's in a residential neighborhood. What happens if people just start running out of the street? And, I understand kind of all of these different aspects and why they are looking at it. But that's the beauty of this subcommittee, is that we are looking at it from this other lens of, hey, there's second and third order effects to these kind of safety recommendations. And so I think there might be a way that we can meet their intent and ours as well. And I think suggesting some mobile licensure is a good idea. Something saying we're not blowing it off, and they will be trained and prepared to handle that, but we want to open that access up so that we're not, we're letting everybody get involved. Thanks.
Thank you. Rochelle.
My job in the Behavioral Health Administration is to license addiction and mental health treatment centers. And in doing so, we do have a both and concept that we're discussing here. So we not only license brick and mortar settings, which may also become a healing center, for example, I hope in the future, but also those practitioners that are individual. As long as they can have a business license and zoning and fire inspection to conduct that work, it doesn't matter if it's a carved out space in their home that can be secure and offer a confidential treatment setting. They can go out to clients' homes and do work. They can do telehealth. They are doing this work in various capacities, not just in a brick and mortar setting. Within their home, it would be an office space that is separate from the rest of their living quarters, so to speak. So I think both and is a good concept because thinking about it from a clinician standpoint, you might have medicine and go to someone's house for end of life, or we have clinicians that do family therapy in the home. So being able to go to someone's home to do that seems appropriate. I know that Dr. Goodwin's brought up like doing yoga in the park and having a license to maybe meet someone in an outdoor space. So that practitioner, holds the license and the duties that of ethical guidelines and licensure through DORA, right? So we're not licensing them, we're licensing the space and we're licensing the services they provide. So I think that when we look at it from maybe a clinical perspective, all of these scenarios may be necessary to reach the most people and provide the broadest services to the community. And at least from a behavioral health perspective of what we're doing, all of that fits within our scope of practice as well.
Thank you very much. Matt.
Thanks for all those really good points, Rochelle. I just wanted to echo Lundy's comments in support of the highest degree of autonomy possible, especially when it comes to freeing facilitators from being tied to one healing center or one cultivator, because competition is one way to lower costs without public financing. And so I think that's a creative way to leverage the power of markets in favor of increasing access.
Thank you. Sam.
Yeah, I just wanted to one thing that Rochelle mentioned, yoga in the park and facilitation or like outdoor spaces, statute does not permit public consumption. So just wanted to clarify that. And then on the section, what I have right now, and just wanted to run it by you guys, and is the legislature should revise the natural medicine license types codified at 44-50-401/404 to clarify that a facilitator can purchase natural medicine product directly from cultivators or product manufacturers without requiring a facilitator to purchase through a healing center. That sound good?
Sounds good to me. I see nods. So unless there's an objection from a subcommittee member, let's go ahead and sub in that language.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I do have a question for Brian, because I'm realizing I think there's two issues going on here. One is the apparent requirement in the law that facilitators attach to healing centers, because that's the only way they're going to be able to get natural medicine product. But then I think I believe it's a separate issue of whether or not facilitators can offer natural medicine services outside of the healing center, for example, at home. Is there a provision in the law, Brian, that prohibits the latter? Even if they're affiliated with for purposes of acquiring the medicine?
No, so the Natural Medicine Health Act so we're in Title 12 now, specifically directs DORA to provision or to provide rules related to provision of natural medicine services. And I think that the exact verbiage is like authorized locations outside of healing centers. So no, the Natural Medicine Health Act specifically contemplates facilitation outside of healing centers. And to clarify, I think the only relationship that is like clear cut in Title 44 is that you can't be a healing center without a facilitator. I think the other definitions of the license types are vague about whether or not a facilitator could buy from a cultivator / product manufacturer. So I don't want to say like the way it's defined says you can't do it. It's again me being like cautious. It's better to revise it so it's clear that you can do it. But to your specific point about going outside of a healing center, yeah, the Natural Medicine Health Act specifically contemplates services out of a healing center.
Okay, and I'll give it to you, Sam, in just 1 second. I just want to put a seat, Dr. Good. Was I hearing that the emergency response subcommittee has actually been going in a different direction and saying, no, we actually have to be doing all of this in healing centers and nowhere else?
Yeah, it's not just them. It's like DOR too. I mean, and we're talking about all kinds of things too, right? And so, and I keep pushing back on this one because I think there's a lot of negatives to it. But I don't think this is locked in yet, and I think people are still trying to decide. And I think that's why it's so important we kind of jump in early and say, look, here's all the reasons why maybe we shouldn't go that way. Because I really do see people feel safer with that idea that it is a licensed healing center, because it is a steady place. The first responders will know that it's there. There's camera systems. There's air gap computers for your video recordings. I mean, there's all kinds of things we're talking about. You don't have to worry about other weapons being there. You're not worried about other substances like drugs or marijuana or any kind of even mold or whatever, right? And you have a little bit more commercial regulation on it. And so there is a lot of pros to going to a place like that, but there are some negatives too. But they're not looking at it through. I mean, I'm on that board too, right? The board's not looking at it through that lens. It's looking through keeping people safe. And I don't know, because it sounded like some of them sat on other boards too, like maybe. Oh, Sam, you want to jump in? Yeah, jump in for me.
I just wanted to supplement like what you're saying, right? Like, so what DOR said is that from their perspective, there's a concern for allowing facilitation outside of a location at a facilitator's own home, like their private residence, offering that service from their own home rather than a specific location. But the conversation is kind of like I don't want to say it's like 3 parts, but it's pretty multifaceted, right? It's like, what are the certain cases that a facilitator is allowed to enter someone's home? And what are those specific cases? What are those reasons? Is it disabilities, mobility concerns? Is it potentially rural access, right? And then as well as how hospice or end of life care in some manner, right? Like what is the policy there regarding that, right? Who is permitted to be there? Are children allowed to be at the home at the time of, right? How do you dispose of product that is at someone's home, right? And then we got into the conversations about like lingering questions that we didn't touch on around facilitators preparing or administering the product and handling it. Like how do we disclose that in the preparation session pieces, or do we, there's challenges there. But what I do want to highlight regarding that subcommittee, right, is Dr. Connor put together like a 1-pager or more. I think it's about 2 pages, but it's draft recommendations for authorized locations other than healing centers, right? So it's kind of working on what is a location other than a healing center look like? Is it a license? What are the challenges there? Do they have these same requirements around cameras, safety exits, fire, all those pieces associated with a healing center? Or what do the alternatives look like? Do they look like a therapist's office, private office? And so I think it's a really long discussion. It's challenging and not something that we can do in like 1 month and not for sure have bad policy around. But I think it is something that, even though we are at 8 months in and setting up a regulatory framework or recommendations for a regulatory framework for a new industry in the state, this is something that we are going to have to continue to work on in that subcommittee once recommendations are submitted. Right? What is authorized what is the authorized locations that are permitted? When can people access those homes? I think we need a longer time period to really dive into that policy and the concerns around diversion. How do you track it? Do they need a license, right? Or do they say, or is there like a registry where they say, I'm entering this person's home? How long does a facilitator hold the products that they bought for that specific facilitation? Do they hold it for a month? Do they hold it for 3 days? I think there's a lot of challenges around the inventory tracking system, how we can make sure and say that we're tracking, we know where the product is, there is no diversion, they checked all the boxes when entering someone's home. And then what are the requirements when you're entering someone's home, like who's allowed to be there? And I think when we get into the end-of-life care, palliative care, how do you get consent from someone who might be not verbal or can't consume the product, right? This is going to take a bit longer. So I think we can't shut the door on outside other authorized locations, because as Rochelle and VHA have noted multiple times, right, they're getting inquiries from their licensees about wanting to offer this service, right, at clinics. So we need a bit longer time, but we need to make sure that we're tailoring the recommendations. And that's why I think what we said about adding bullet 5 on revising facilitators, revising in statute that facilitators could purchase from a cultivator and a manufacturer should be done or should be recommended. And if we can do it in legislative session, I think that's a fantastic idea, because it positions us as we're working on those policy nuances to continue and move forward.
Thanks very much. Dr. Goodwin.
Yeah, we have been talking a lot about those other authorized locations, but again, they are in the context of end-of-life care, hospice, palliative care, someone's ambulatory. We're not talking about a bunch of otherwise healthy people who just want to do this in a residential setting. Right now, my understanding is that's not even on the table. And so, keep that in mind. Two, one of the issues is, as DOR is concerned, that facilitators would use this as a way to get around the healing center, like licensure, right? And they were concerned that there was like a loophole that, I guess they wouldn't get their cut of the pie or something. And so it is something that they're worried about. And so that's why maybe suggesting a mobile license or, some other way might help alleviate some of their worries, that people are going to find a loophole and just kind of do their own thing without kind of going through the proper channels.
Matt.
Just going back to the issue of facilitators, as opposed to the healing center and the licenses being tied to the location there, just the facilitator access to medicine. I can't find anywhere in the law where it says that facilitators can't obtain the medicine directly from a cultivator. So unless I'm misreading that, should this committee possibly consider just making a rule recommendation to NMD directly as opposed to a legislative recommendation? think that would be much simpler.
I think that's a question for Brian.
Yeah, so that's kind of why I caveated it with it's not 100% clear that they can't do it, but the statute isn't clear that, or the license types aren't clear that a cultivator or product manufacturer could transfer it to a facilitator, because it talks about those license types transferring natural medicines to others. So someone could interpret the statute to say, well, because facilitators aren't in the statute, then they're necessarily excluded from entities that they can transfer natural medicines to. Like I said, I'm taking a very cautious reading. And so I think that the better route would be to do a statutory change, but that's just me being a cautious lawyer that wants to protect the program and, belt and suspenders.
Lindy.
Yeah, I actually wanted to briefly touch on a point, Dr. Goodwin, that you made about the fear of DOR not getting, their allocated funds for healing centers. One of the things that's been on my mind is many practitioners I know do their work in multiple locations, whether it's through being a contractor, through many different avenues. Maybe they do have a contract with a healing center, but then they also have their private practice on Wednesdays and Thursdays, right? And they share the space to subsidize costs to make it more affordable for them. So one of the ideas I had is, what if we just actually had facilitators list all the addresses of where they engage in practice, and maybe a mobile license is in addition to that. But then if any of those addresses are not a healing center, then there could be some kind of fee that DOR receives for a non-healing center setting, so that there is a way for us to track all locations, because many facilitators will be multi-location, no matter how we set it up, as well as a way that DOR doesn't feel like, it's completely eradicating the healing center model for them.
Yeah, interesting. Dr. Goodwin.
Yeah, I think the best thing, and kind of Matt's point, like the law is not clear on this, and really the problem is coming from, I think, policy recommendations, both from emergency response and products, right? And I think one of the big concerns is chain of custody, right, and handling of psilocybin. Really, I think both of those committees are concerned about that, and so tracking it from cultivators to healing centers, and then having healing centers distribute it is just a kind of a cleaner model for them, and I think that's where that's coming from. And so the beauty of this is that none of this is a problem yet, right? These are all recommendations and kind of where it's coming. So I think getting in this early now is a good way. And it seems like the three things that we have talked about today, making the facilitator independent, good, allowing them to kind of get to it on their own, the substance on their own is great, and then perhaps proposing a third license type, that mobile thing. I think those would be great starts for us in kind of bringing this thing back to something that's a little bit more reasonable, and I think we're doing great. Yeah.
Thank you. Sam.
Yeah, and I just wanted to comment that DOR is not here to provide their perspective or opinion on their on previous comments, but I think, and I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I think that the concern, right, is how they would go about regulating or inspecting locations, knowing that this is a cash funded program, so they would have to hire staff, so that would reflect on those licenses at the moment. But like if they were to enter a facilitator's home, and then I also wonder about zoning on that aspect, but I don't even want us to even talk about that, because localities can't ban it, but they can do time, place, and manner, and they can't ban the transportation in those pieces. So I just wanted to reiterate that I think for DOR's perspective is like, how do you go about licensing that and then inspecting that, knowing that this will add costs associated to the entirety of the program. So
Yeah, thank you. Rochelle.
Part of my desire to be a part of these non-voting subcommittees participants are to really think about the concept of the guardrails and the bumper guards for all of these scenarios that provide health and safety regulations and rules for our providers, but also to keep Coloradoans safe. So it's twofold. It's not just the clinician, but also the healing centers. And so having, thinking about it in that way and not trying to put barriers to providers and participants, but to look at what are the guardrails, what are the bumper guards to each of these scenarios that we need to conceptualize to keep these access safe for everyone, I think is an important concept to always keep in mind in developing these recommendations. And then the second point is I kind of think about the transportation of the medicine similar to the controlled substance licensing, which is already developed federally and could benefit us to look at what are these federal guidelines of transporting controlled substances like methadone, buprenorphine, having take-home doses. I can talk all day about how we license that type of treatment provider and the storage of medication, but I won't bore you with that. So there are some things out there that we might be able to pull in that are already concepts that are available in transporting medication that might give us good ideas and language to keep everyone safe in that capacity.
Thank you very much. Brian.
Sorry, I'm going to keep workshopping the definition. It takes me 1,000 times to write a motion, or 1,000 days to write a motion, if you can imagine how many drafts I do. But going back to what Matt was saying about it might be within the statutory authority already, maybe a better way to do it is to kind of say both things. And, we stick with what I've already drafted and add something that says something to the effect of, to the extent that regulators believe they already have the statutory authority to permit it, they should promulgate a rule that permits transfer of natural medicines directly to a facilitator. In part because I agree, like the statute's vague and I don't want to give anybody the belief that I think it's outside the statutory authority to do it. So maybe that kind of gets at both and it makes it clear that we're not saying that's what the statute says, but if you can handle it by rule, do it by rule. If you need to do a statutory change, let's do that.
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking the same. I think we should have it cover both. Lundy.
Yeah, I wanted to affirm what Rochelle was saying earlier of the fact that there are mechanisms that exist for how we can do this well, both related to the medicine and related to diversity of location. So I would love for us to perhaps provide some of that information to other subcommittees, or Sam and Lori can decide the best way to do it, but to, instead of approaching this from how dangerous it is, I actually want us to approach it from how do we do this as a state in other ways with medicines and entering people's residences? Because I know as a licensed therapist, there's a whole career you can have in doing on-site family therapy, children therapy for kids, in their homes. And so this isn't a new idea, both related to therapeutic practice and residences, or the work with medicine. So I would love for us to just be a little bit more informed for the current mechanisms at play.
Thank you, Lundy. I guess I just want to weigh in that my thought, and I'm not on the emergency response subcommittee, and DOR is not here to kick me under the proverbial table, but I do feel like maybe we're going personally in the wrong direction of over-regulating the various sites in which natural medicine services might be provided. I mean, and I'm not saying that the current status quo is the role model for this program in all ways going forward, but how this is happening right now is in people's homes or in third-party locations. And I'm not saying that we stamp that and say that that means it's okay, but I do feel like we are erring, too far on the side of caution and too far away on the side of access, and letting the consumer decide, do they feel safe going into somebody's home, and, or do they prefer to go to a healing center? That's their choice. Maybe there's waivers, et cetera, involved, but I think denying them that choice, just based on historical precedent to the degree I'm aware of these things going on in the state currently, I just feel like we're choking, the access point to these potentially very meaningful and helpful services. So a couple specific, go ahead, Dr. Goodwin, I'll come back in a second.
I was going to say quickly, the Emergency Response Committee is doing that, right? We've had experts come in who do in-home hospice, who do in-home palliative care, who are providing these types of services in home already, because we're trying to figure out, how do you do this safely, and what are the regulations here, and so we are trying to look at that as well, and so that's not happening in a vacuum. So I just want to give you a little comfort there, but it is kind of what is driving some of these decisions, right? Because it's well, what does big medical do here? And this is a little different, and so we are trying to walk that line the best we can. But anyway, thanks.
Thank you. So a couple of efforts to distill and synthesize the discussion so far. Number one is I wanted to confirm subcommittee consensus that there is that we should have basically a twofold recommendation with regard to facilitator ability to get product independent of healing centers and otherwise not be required to be tethered to a healing center. And then I think there's a separate. This is more. I believe we have consensus on that item that I want to confirm. The thing that I'm not sure where our consensus is that I want to I don't know that we need to vote, but I want to kind of call a question on for now is, does this subcommittee, in the spirit of equity, want to make a recommendation regarding the availability of these services outside of healing centers? And even though recognizing it's really under the quote unquote jurisdiction of other subcommittees, which as many of our recommendations are, do we want to make a statement about that? And even if we know that another subcommittee might be going in a bit of a different direction. So why don't we take the first question first? Are there any objections to modifying what is still sitting in front of us as recommendation number 4 to re-clarify the statutory recommendation that I think most recently Sam read, and then adding what Brian suggested in terms of, and actually maybe making this first, that, that the state should allow facilitators to access natural medicine product independently and implement regulations accordingly. And just to further clarify the statute, then, Part B, potential legislative amendment we're discussing. If that was clear enough to say anything. Sam, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, Brian and I have been trying to edit that edition that we're calling number 5, right? The legislature, so what I have right now is the legislature should revise the natural medicine license types codified at 445401 to 404 CRS to clarify that a facilitator can purchase natural medicine or natural medicine product directly from cultivators or product manufacturers without requiring a facilitator to purchase through a healing center. To the extent the regulators determine they already have statutory authority to do so, the regulators should promulgate rules clarifying that cultivators and product manufacturers can sell natural medicine or natural medicine product directly to facilitators.
That sounds good to me. I might take that second half and put it first, just as kind of like that's sort of our opinion, or at least kind of implying that it is our opinion that that authority is already there, and then saying kind of the just in case is the statutory piece.
Yeah, I'll keep working on it.
Cool. I think we're getting there in terms of the actual language. Thank you both very much. for that. Okay, on the second point, what do subcommittee members think about us making a recommendation that we think that natural medicine services should be available outside of healing centers? And I don't know if we want to say more to kind of, talk about like at-home services, for example, outside of the more clinical hospice setting, for example. But I'd like to get subcommittee member input on that. Dr. Goodwin.
I think one of the arguments that was being made that is if you were going to do it outside, then you would just get that place certified as a healing center, right? And so we would have to clarify that that's not what we're talking about. If we're talking about doing it in residence, again, and this is kind of why I like the idea of a mobile license. So we're just getting rid of this healing center and saying, okay, I can go to their house, I can do it to my house or whatever, but I have the special license that allows me to do that. But that is the kind of idea. Like, if you're going to go to some place, then they want that place certified as a healing center. That's kind of how I understand DOR's kind of take on it from our discussion yesterday. I could be wrong. Sounds like Brian's got something for that.
Thank you. Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, so I think it's helpful to just keep the natural medicine code, which is where DOR's authority lives out of, separate from the Natural Medicine Health Act, for the purposes of this, because obviously they overlap a ton. But so specifically the provision that talks about authorized locations, it's 12-170-105, and it tells DORA to establish regulations for, or parameters is the actual language, parameters for a facilitator to provide and supervise natural medicine services at an authorized location that is not a healing center's licensed premises, including a healthcare facility or a private residence. So that statutory language seems to clearly contemplate doing it, like the licensing of a facility is completely out of it, and it specifically says not a healing center. So I think this quite clearly contemplates DORA promulgating rules that says when a facilitator can go into an authorized location and give natural medicine services. And the question is, what is an authorized location and what are the parameters for that sort of facilitation?
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that statutory language sounds about along the lines of what I might want to say, personally speaking. But I guess I want to ask you, Brian, can these states, or I guess in this case DOR's response to that, say that we're implementing regulations and the regulations say there are no such other locations, or would that be contradictory?
That's probably a good question for an ES in another session, because I'd have to look at the code and see if they can do something like that.
Or whether they can do that.
I guess. Go ahead, Sam. Sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I again, they're not here, but they're our partners in this whole process. So I'm confident that we can get somewhere together if it works out. Or if we can.
Thank you. I guess I think what I'm really asking is there any merit or potential impact to us making a recommendation in this regard when the statute seems to say about what we're hoping will happen? Dr. Goodwin.
You guys are losing me with all this lawyer talk, but it seems like the spirit of intent here is we want to recommend allowing facilitation to happen in residence, right? In private residence. That's what we're trying to get to, right? Or
I think that's fair. Yeah, I mean, that's at least one thing.
It sounds like the law is kind of open to all of this, and that we want to make rules about what's what, and we just want to say we think it should happen in residence. We think that's okay. I think that's, if one of the lawyers can put together some kind of legalese that says we want this to happen in residences, I think that's what we're trying to get. I just want to make sure I'm following.
Yeah, I think the directive in 105 is pretty clear. It's telling DORA to create parameters for facilitation outside of a healing center. And so I think to get at your point, Dr. Goodwin, it would be something to the effect of, we recommend that DORA should say private residences are an authorized location for provision of natural medicine services, or something to the effect of DORA should develop parameters for provision of natural medicine services in an individual's private residence, something like that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Commissioner?
I hate to even get in on this, but because you guys have some good discussions. What about zoning regulations? Because of course my head goes completely to land use and county restrictions on where it can be. So I just wanted to put that out there. I'm not like raising objections. I'm just telling you guys where some people might challenge it.
Sam, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think, and I might defer to Brian if you can find that specific area in statute, but it says that I think they can set time, place, and manner, but I don't know if they can directly ban it in any capacity, and anything that might contradict or conflict with the current law, right? But I don't know, like if an HOA would say, like if one of their residences can't receive facilitation, like I don't know.
Well, and you might have people that are offering it out of their house, saying it's personal residence and stuff like that. That's where you're going to get some of the pushback, I think.
Yeah, and yeah. I think it goes to that distinction of like, you know, is it, when we're saying private residence for individuals, is it individuals as in the participant, or is it the licensed facilitator operating out of there? And then how does that work with mixed use zones, like a commercial zone? Or I don't know what I don't know about zoning in that aspect, but that seems pretty true.
Yeah, I guess I would just say I do think it is a very different matter from a zoning perspective and otherwise. I mean, if an emergency or even non-emergency, you know, clinician comes to your home to give you care, your home doesn't become a commercial premises. It stays a residential premises with somebody giving you medical care within your home. So I think that might actually be easier, and in some cases, you know, just off the cuff, preferable than all the regulation that might be necessary to allow facilitators to offer the services at their own home. But that's my opinion. Dr. Goodwin.
Yeah, I like where you're going with that. I don't know that that's our problem. You know, so like for mental health companies, you can run a mental health clinic from your home, but like my HOA doesn't allow me to run any business where customers come here every day. I can run online businesses, but so that's my problem, right? If I wanted to do that, then I would just need to move to another place. I'm not sure that we have to get involved in that. We just need to kind of write our policy saying, yeah, we're okay with it. And, you know, if it's within all the applicable laws where you live, then you can do it there. But we're okay with it. And I think really that if we just stick to that, I think we'd be okay. But I'm not a lawyer, so.
Good lawyer. And his hands up. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, so again, like not super great at zoning stuff, but I think the reference to time, place, manner in the statute is a reference to the local jurisdiction's ability to zone. And I just want to like echo Billy that my gut is the same as yours, that zoning is not a problem until you're talking about a facilitator trying to use their own residence as the place where the facilitation is occurring. Then one, you have a zoning problem, and two, now I think you have a very serious DOR problem where you probably do have to license your house as a healing center because you're using it as a commercial facility. So just wanted to say, yeah, I agree with you, Billy.
Thank you. Okay, so I think where we are at as a subcommittee is to at least consider and maybe vote on a recommendation that we think that I'm going to say the state because now I'm confused on whether it's DOR or DORA, should implement regulations permitting the delivery of natural medicine services in private residences. Something like I see, Dr. Goodwin.
Could you repeat that so I can get that down?
The recommendation is the state should promulgate regulations permitting the delivery of natural medicine services in private residences. Pending Brian's amendment. Go ahead, Brian.
I would ask whether, maybe clarify when you say in private residences, can you make that more specific? So private residences of participants, just so we don't run into this, well, my house is a private residence and I'm a facilitator argument.
Right. Yeah, well, I think, again, my inclination, and I think the easier recommendation, is the private residence of the patient, of the consumer. I don't know that we want to foreclose the possibility of, at least right now here, of facilitators offering service out of their own home, and if we name one and not the other, do we imply that we are foreclosing that, or maybe it doesn't really matter, and we'll just take your recommendation to focus for now on the private residence of the consumer. Dr. Goodwin.
I always seem to be on the other side when it comes to this, but when you go into someone's house, you have no idea if they have weapons there, if you have extra drugs there, if there's, some kind of danger, what kind of animals they have. They got venomous cobras or pit bulls or whatever. And two, in your own house, you can control that, right? And then you also can build kind of a more appropriate space. So let's talk about what we're actually here to do, which is to run somebody through a journey. It might be difficult to go and set up something nice in someone else's home that you don't have any control over, okay? And so I don't love the idea of just automatically getting rid of the facilitator's home. I mean, I do think that maybe you should have a separate interest to it if you want it to be there. Maybe it does need to meet some requirements or whatever. Maybe it does need to be a licensed healing center, right? But it just so happens to be in a residence, and there's a lot of things that go into it. But I don't think that we should just shut it down automatically. You may have to jump through some more hoops to it, but there are some benefits to being able, for a facilitator to do it in a space that they control. I just want to throw that out there.
Thank you. I agree. Just a quick note before I go to Rochelle. I think I'm not recommending, and I don't think anybody's recommending that we would make a recommendation to foreclose that. I guess the concern is that if we just mention the residents of consumers, are we implying that we're foreclosing, or at least leaning against the residents of the facilitator? One thought is that we could say something, recommend the state, whatever I just said before, in terms of the private residence of the consumer, and take all feasible steps, or add a little bit more of a caveat with regard to the residents of the facilitator, just recognizing the additional kind of potential difficulties and barriers there, but still encouraging the state to go in that direction. Maybe that's getting to where we're at. I'm not sure. Rochelle, please go ahead.
Again, I agree with both and I do want to say, in my training for ketamine assisted treatment, there's, and I think it's applicable here as well, you're going to discuss the set and setting. And as a licensed therapist doing home therapy, we ask these questions prior to entering someone's homes about pets, about weapons. You can ask whatever you want to ask a client before you enter their home for your safety, and you have some safety training and mechanisms in place as to when you would leave, when you don't feel safe in a home visit, for example. So I think that's up to the practitioner to, again, develop those bumper rails for safety if they're willing to go into other people's homes, and vice versa. If you're having people come into your home, what are the safety guardrails that you need to establish the appropriate set and setting to deliver this medication?
Thank you. That's well said. Dr. Goodwin.
One more bullet in my fight here. Right now what they're talking about in emergency response is that you'd be limited to only facilitating 4 people per facilitator. And so, we've all talked about the money and how expensive it is. If you have to go out and do a 10 or 12 hour session one at a time, only at other people's residences, it prevents you from seeing 4 people at once. So if you can, if you have your space, you could bring the 4 people in, and then you could I mean, just in terms of running a business, you're more likely to survive than going out and doing one at a time. And so it's another reason why I don't want to shut the door on letting them come to your own house. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Yeah, heard for sure. Lundy.
Thank you, Chair. Could you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just want to reinforce what Dr. Goodwin is saying. You know, these have direct impacts to how a business can survive, and my hope is thrive. So I think if this is the way that we can support health of the market for as many people as possible,
permit the delivery of natural medicine services outside of healing centers, including in the private residence of the consumer and the private residence of the facilitator. And, you know, I think, you know, kind of going back to the thread throughout this meeting, I mean, we're the equity subcommittee. So we're allowed, I think, lean in a little bit, you know, on equity and not disregard practicality and cost and zoning, et cetera, but being aware that other subcommittees and certainly the regulators are going to be fully aware of those barriers, and that we're kind of putting a little tap on the gas to do all that you can to work this out. So I would be comfortable with making that kind of recommendation that hits both types of private residences if other subcommittees are. Dr. Goodwin.
Yeah, I would too. And I think, you know, we can make suggestions to alleviate people's fear on down the road, whether that's maybe there's only a certain number of licenses that we give like that in the beginning, kind of like they do with a liquor license, right? You know, there's only so many to go around, and, you know, you can only have so many or whatever, just until we kind of, you know, the program matures more. So, I mean, there are some ways, like, it doesn't have to be every facilitator can do this whenever they want or whatever. Like, we could suggest, again, a special license or a certain number in the beginning, or so just something so that we can alleviate fears while also meeting health equity, you know, kind of the spirit of intent.
Thank you. Lundy.
Yeah, Dr. Goodwin, I agree with guardrails. I want to give one cautionary tale, though, of doing any kind of lottery system and restriction system with licenses. What I've seen that do in the past in the cannabis market is actually create a lot of super inequitable dynamics where people start selling their licenses for like $250,000 or more, and actually that thoughtful guardrail from the state side turns into a massive inequity on the consumer side. So I just want to make sure what guardrails we put in place don't create a downstream impact that is the opposite of what we're trying to do. So I have concerns about a lottery system or a model of that kind, but I do endorse the thought of how can we provide guardrails so that this can be done well.
I just wanted to echo Lundy on limiting licenses or a lottery system. I don't think it's a good idea.
Okay, heard. So there aren't any hands up at the moment. Is there a motion to adopt a recommendation that the state should promulgate regulations that permit the delivery of natural medicine services outside of healing centers, including in private residences of both the consumer and the facilitator?
So moved. Dr. Goodwin.
Thank you, Dr. Goodwin. Is there a second?
Second, Lundy.
Thank you, Lundy. All in favor of that recommendation, please say aye.
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 Got at least 4. Any no's?
I have to be the no. I have too many concerns about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We definitely respect you casting that vote. So I think that doesn't leave anyone to abstain. Any abstentions? Okay, so this recommendation is adopted, and let the record note that it was a 4-1 vote, not a unanimous vote. All right, way to go, team. So I think now my question is, do we want to, are there other items on the master list, let me say the broader list, of consolidated recommendations that subcommittee members want to raise here at this meeting? And if there are, let's take a 5-minute break and come back and consider those. If there aren't, let's move toward adjournment. So I just want to pause and open it up. Are there other issues that subcommittee members from the broader consolidated list of recommendations that subcommittee members want to discuss at today's meeting? Hearing none. Let me try to find my script. The next agenda item, which I'm going to move on to until somebody raises a hand and tells me not to, is to review the next meeting date. And that date, at least on my calendar, and if somebody else knows it, shout it out, the 11th of January is what I have. I see Lori nodding. Okay, so we are scheduled to meet on Thursday, January 11 at 1 Mountain Time. Any subcommittee members have, any questions or concerns about that date? Okay, so that is when we will meet. And now I'm gonna, find my script. Okay, so I would like to thank everyone for your attendance and participation during today's meeting. Before we adjourn, there are a few items to be addressed. Okay, we already talked about the next meeting. Please remember that your attendance is necessary to ensure a quorum for the meeting. Now I'd like to ask the subcommittee members to attest regarding conflicts. So do you attest and affirm that all conflicts of interest have been disclosed and that confidentiality of all board matters has been maintained since the previous board meeting? I do so attest. Dr. Gonzalez?
I attest.
Lundy?
I attest.
Commissioner?
I attest.
Dr. Goodwin?
I attest.
Great, thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I can make the motion. This is Tina.
I'll second that. This is Commissioner Buxton Andrade.
Thank you, Commissioner. All in favor of adjourning the meeting, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any noes? Any abstentions? Okay, this meeting of the Public Health and Health Equity Subcommittee is adjourned. Thank you all very much for your time and contributions. See you next time.